Hello, hello, folks. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Just imagine you're settling into a large auditorium, the University of Michigan or at Yale. You're walking in, you're rubbing elbows with some other folks next to you. You've got a copy of a new book. You're looking at this book and you just kind of like you're very excited to crack it open. It's going to be a moment you're going to remember. My name is Stuart DeQ. I'm the executive director of the Yale Center for Business and the Environment, a joint program of the Yale School of Management and the Yale School of the Environment. We're thrilled to be your host today for the conversation between two wonderful authors, Vincent Stanley and Andy Hoffman, on Andy's new book. Just going to give you a little context about this before introducing Vincent and kicking off the conversation with Andy. Over a decade ago, we were fortunate enough to invite an author to campus who spent 2 days with us, kind of walking around, going to every single school hallway meeting that we could schedule him into, and providing a different model of what a business could look like in theory and in practice with intention and a consistent kind of like way of improving the process by which they operated, the community, how they supported the communities they were engaged in, and the impact of that business. And that was Vincent with his book, The Responsible Company. And it really was a pivotal moment for us here at Yale of building a relationship with someone who had an incredible amount to kind of teach and support and mentor and guide students, faculty, and others on campus. So we've been fortunate and privileged to kind of maintain and strengthen that relationship with Vincent over the years. And one of the remarkable things that Vincent brings as an author is his deep appreciation and understanding of the kind of work, commitment, time, and insight it takes for other authors to kind of put works together that have meaning and impact in the world. And there's really, I can think of very few people who, when you sit in an academic institution like this, where you look at the kind of discipline of systems thinking between schools of the environment and schools of management and how those can combine and what that can look like when they're together, to see and understand the work of Andy Hoffman from the University of Michigan over time, the impact and inspiration he's had on other joint degree programs, on teaching, on engagement, in networks of business school faculty, of students, of practitioners is really remarkable. And Andy has written a wonderful book, Business School and the Noble Purpose of the Market, which we are going to be discussing today. Now, I have an advanced copy. This is one of the benefits of being a partner and a collaborator. So I've gotten to read it. It is not yet on shelves, but we will drop a link in the chat, and there is a 20% discount code for folks who would like to be able to purchase it. So you can, and highly encourage that. And we're going to get right into this conversation. I'm going to turn it over to Vincent, but just our sincere thanks to both Vincent for taking the time to read, think, engage on Andy's work, and really to Andy for the year and decades you've spent thinking about this, and then the year you spent researching, designing, and putting this in place to be able to then inspire and support others on what is a very needed and timely set of recommendations and thoughts on how we can transform education. But turning it over to you, Vincent, and again, Andy, thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. I want to start off just by noting that I read a lot of business books, and what I really appreciate about business school and the noble purpose of the market, aside from its content, is the thoroughness with which that you brought to the subject. And also the quality of the writing it was really a pleasure to read, and that can sometimes I can evade that pleasure sometimes in reading academic writing, depending on the number of passive verbs used. But this was quite a good read. But I want to start off and ask you. I know it was a long process for you to come to this book, but if you could just talk a little bit about that. How did you come to write this? What was the motivation? And then a little bit, what did you learn while writing it?
I've been focusing on business and sustainability in the business school for 30 years. When I first started, no one was really doing this. I remember going to knock on doors to be on my committee in grad school and saying, "What are you doing here? This has nothing to do with business." And so the way in was to connect it to business norms and rules as they are. We don't need to talk about climate change. We'll talk about operational efficiency. We'll talk about marketing. We'll talk about consumer demand. That was the way to get people's attention. And about 5, 6 years ago, I started to really feel that while it's expedient, it's not going to do the job. In the words of John Ehrenfeld, whom I wrote a book with, my former advisor, he said, it's going to reduce the velocity at which we're running into a brick wall, but it's not going to change direction. And
Yeah.
so I really started to reflect on the idea that issues like climate change, they're not environmental issues, they're systems breakdowns. And to fix the system breakdown, you have to fix the system that caused it. And that's capitalism. I'm not saying throw it out. I'm saying it needs some TLC. Now, we all have our zone of influence, and mine is academia. And so that's what I'm focusing on here is that there's so many pieces to this puzzle, and my piece is how do we change business education? Because quite frankly, it's ossified. It's changed very little in 40 years.
Mhm. Can you talk a little bit about what's missing when you try to approach the problem uh, strictly from the point of view of uh, the known the known entities that people deal with?
In business school right now, we teach students the only way to make a decision is to make the business case. Um, a company needs to make more money by doing this. But that's as absurd as saying, give me the business case not to commit suicide. It leaves out so many difficult, thorny issues in the questions that we face. I found a political cartoon, I put it in the book, where it shows these business people looking at the world burning, and someone says to the other, someone better monetize this and quickly. I mean, that's the absurdity of the idea of only focusing on the win-win. And I just don't think it's that simple that we're going to deal with climate change by developing a new product or a new service, make ourselves rich, address climate change, and live happily ever after. We have to ask some more difficult questions that are more in the win-lose category to be more
Mhm.
thoughtful about how the economy evolves. And so if you just take an elective on climate change or inequality, I think that's another serious issue and drop it into a curriculum that says the only thing that matters is make money for the shareholder. Government has a limited role in the market. Efficiency is always good. People are inherently selfish. I can go down the list. It just won't work. They'll come into this class, they'll say, yeah, okay, let's work on climate change. And go to the rest of the classes and saying, we can't. And so something has to give. And I think right now, actually, it's a really interesting time. At first, I thought, oh boy, this book coming out now, well, higher education's under fire, but periods of chaos are opportunities for change. Winston Churchill said, never waste a good crisis. We're in a crisis.
Yeah,
Um, some of it coming from Washington. Certainly, artificial intelligence is disrupting what we do. So I think in this moment of chaos and confusion is a time to lean in to change.
yeah,
Say, what's this an opportunity for?
yeah. There are a couple of related to that. I think there are a couple of quotes in the book where you talked about moving from solving challenges to creating opportunities, and um, and also from wealth extraction to wealth creation. Now, those are primarily economic arguments, but there are also arguments, I think, for reframing the way we imagine the future. I think part of the problem in the environmental movement and for people who are moved by the sort of planetary crisis is that we are good at describing the problems without imagining a world in which we're actually dealing with that in a fairly consistent and powerful way. Um, and back to your story, I remember even within Patagonia, we would try to come up with the business case for some of our older line executives. And I, I remember thinking about 10 years ago, this is not what motivates people.
And
Um,
it blinds you. I mean, I have a section in the book where I just describe the tyranny of making the business case. It tells our students you have no agency. You are beholden to, by the way, I would add one type of shareholder, the one who's short-term focused, doesn't care about anything except money. That's not all shareholders, but when you talk about focusing on the shareholder, that's it. And it takes their humanity out of the equation. So as an example, you can become a senior executive, you can become the CEO, you could become a female CEO. And then you look at your workforce and realize women are paid 85 cents on the dollar on average. Does that mean you will only fix it if the company makes more money?
mhm.
That's preposterous. I mean, you fix it because it's fair. And
Yeah,
and would you drop the program if it didn't increase profits for the company? No. And
yeah,
so that's where this all starts to go amok. And I am encouraged because I'm finding more and more students starting to push back and say, wait a minute, this curriculum, this is not what I came here for. There are more and more students, not all, but a growing vocal minority saying, I'm not buying what you're selling. And I think that can be energy for change within business schools.
yeah. I can attest now there are, I think, nearly 10,000 B Corps of companies with at least a minimum of interest in working on behalf of the stakeholders, but also with some kind of specific purpose.
Yeah. I know that in the students are coming out of business school. I mean, when I first started teaching 30 years ago, most students who wanted to change the world went into schools of government or
Mm.
nonprofit management. Now I see more and more going into schools of business because they see the power of business to make a difference in the world. I'm not saying run business on the ground. You still need to learn the fundamentals, but also appreciate that the power of the market to do good in the world. And quite frankly, if we don't steer the power of the market to solve these problems,
Yeah,
they won't get solved. I mean, um, we need business to address climate change, inequality, figure out how we're going to use AI. If it's only to make money, guess what? Some people are going to get really hurt. They're going to be out of a job, and so we need to just bring more humanity into business school.
yeah. And it's interesting because the title, "The Noble Purpose of the Market," and I think you hark back at in various places in the book to Adam Smith, who started as and primarily viewed himself or was viewed in his time as a moral philosopher. Mariana Mazzucato has talked about that value was a social value in economics until the late 19th century, when value started to be determined solely by price.
Yeah. And
And
his Nobel laureate in economics, his new book, Economics in America, he rips the field saying, wait a minute, it's not all about money. When you talk about trade, you're talking about people's lives. And to leave
yeah,
that out of the equation and say the only thing that matters is profit, really becomes unmoored from the foundations of economics, which is a strong influence within the business school curriculum.
yeah. Um, how is it? I think one of the things I'd like to ask is what are some of the key ways forward that you see, both in business education and in the economy? Because I think you have to kind of define what you're looking for in the world before you look at how you want to educate people for it. But
Yeah. Well, you know, there's so many moving parts to change education. And there's a chapter in there for students. And so I don't know how many students are listening right now, but for the students, I have a message that's threefold. Number one, business schools are broken. Number two, go anyway, because the power in business to make a difference in the world is enormous. But number three, take control of your education. And that means interrogate what you're being taught. I'm not saying, I'll take this, I won't take that. Ask questions, examine, look deeper, and then get outside the business school. You're going to get dropped into a resource-rich environment. Take advantage of all the resources that are out there. Take courses, go to seminars, go to lectures in public policy, in engineering, in the School for the Environment. Get out there, and you can take control of your education and break down the silos that are so embedded within education. The other audience for the book is academics and administrators, and there are different avenues we have. One is change our own teaching portfolio, change our research agenda in the sense that you can still do your academic research, but bring it out into the real world. Don't just let it sit within the academic journals, which, quite frankly, very few people read, are highly theoretically driven, are disconnected from practical questions within the market, and that's really unfortunate. And then start to try and change the institutions within the university. I make a point that we need more academics to behave as what I call elders. And an elder is someone who says, you know what? I don't need more citation counts. I don't need more accolades, external validation. Now it's time for me to stop thinking about my own career and my own stature and start thinking about the institutions in which the next generation will come up, whether that's professors or students. And so I'd like to see more people do that. And one of the problems with our field, a colleague of mine once quipped to me, the problem with our field is we got too many senior professors thinking like junior professors, still chasing the same objectives. And I think when we come to the end of our days as professors, it's not going to be my citation count or my H index that's going to give me satisfaction. It's going to be, did I improve or change the way people think? Did I steer students in the right way? Did I touch them, not just their head, but their heart? How do we bring the whole student into the classroom? Is the world better because I'm here?
Yeah. Um, I like the idea of these of the elders maybe forming a council within the schools to
You know
and
where I got that idea? I heard it in an interview with David Suzuki.
uh,
He stepped down from his TV show, and they said, "Why?" And he says, "I think of myself now as an elder." And that really grabbed me. I really like that idea.
and I also like the idea of looking at of those elders looking at how the students have changed over time, how the world has changed, and how to, given the by that time 30 or 40 years of experience in the academy, how do we steer the change for the future?
Yeah, yeah. And the students are there. I mean, the students are very concerned about climate change. They're very concerned about inequality. Um, they are anxious for a curriculum that follows. They are really resonant with the idea of purpose, vocation, calling, which is the last chapter in the book, which is something that I think is much needed in business school. If we just create students who care about making themselves rich, we're doomed. But if we create a different kind of student that sees their purpose in life of creating viable businesses, but
Yeah.
businesses that serve society, and that is an interesting point because Rakesh Khurana at Harvard wrote a book called From Higher Aims to Hired Hands, and he looked at the evolution of the American Business School. And when the first ones were formed in the early 1900s, Tuck, Harvard,
Yeah.
Wharton, the university said, no, this isn't a serious area of academic inquiry. And they said, no, we're going to teach the titans of industry how to run commerce and service to society. And the university said, okay, that makes
Mhm.
sense. And
Mhm.
the conclusion of his book is we've lost that mandate. We're skill shops. We're access to networks. We need
Mm.
to get back to that idea of commerce and service to society, teaching business students in the same spirit with which we teach doctors to serve.
Yeah.
Um, what a better world it would be if we had that kind of idea, that kind of ethos embedded within the business curriculum. And then, as you said, where are we trying to go?
Mhm.
Ideally, within the business world beyond. Because another chapter I have in the book is that we need to teach students to be stewards of the market. And that gets to something else you referenced earlier, the idea of going from exploitive to creative capitalism. Um, That comes from Joseph Stiglitz, another Nobel laureate in economics, saying, we're practicing exploitive capitalism right now. System's broken. I know. I don't care. I'm going to take my piece for myself.
Yeah.
If we keep doing that, we're also doomed. And so teaching students about the mechanics of the market, how does it work? Like I have a course called Reexamining Capitalism. I'm not making fun of my students, but the first class say, define capitalism for me. And they struggle. And I'm
Mhm.
sure this is true at every business school. I find that very strange that we don't give enough attention to what is capitalism? What was it
Mhm.
originally idea? How has it evolved? What are the multiple forms around the world? Where is it falling short? How can we
Right.
fix it?
It's interesting. I was reading a book. I think she may have been from Michigan. It was by a Marxist scholar several years ago, talking about um, that if you were a Marxist or if you were, a serious traditional socialist, you couldn't dismantle capitalism like you could in the 30s, take over the radio station and the printing press and a couple of other places and take over the society because it's so deeply embedded.
Yeah.
Principles of capitalism are so deeply embedded in daily life. And I think that also makes it difficult in some way to reform.
And then you go back to some of the early writers. I mean, Joseph Schumpeter, Karl Polanyi, uh, John Maynard Keynes, others. They worried about this, the extent to which the values embedded within the market would diffuse through society and displace the deeper moral values and sense of meaning we get in our lives. I think they'd look now and say, it's happened.
Mhm.
I think the first step in fixing it is recognizing it. I
Yeah.
recall the commencement speech at Kenyon College that David Foster Wallace gave. It's called This is Water, and it has a wonderful metaphor of these two fish swimming along. An old fish is coming towards them, says, "Hey, enjoy the water." And the two small, their younger fish swim a little further and says, one says to the other, "What's water?" If you don't know the culture
Yeah.
you're in, if
Yeah.
you're not made aware of it, you take it for granted as the normal way of being. And so I want to show business students this is water. I mean, it is
Yeah.
embedded within our curriculum that people are selfish, that you should screw the other before they screw you. We have metaphors in business school about, conquest and conquering and all this war metaphors. And that's not necessarily the way it's certainly competition, but
Mhm.
there's a spirit of competition that is healthy and there's a spirit of competition that's unhealthy. And we focus too much on the latter and people take it for granted because it's machismo, it's
Yeah. It's
testosterone.
interesting because competition is maybe, I don't know, 10% of business activity and 90% is the cooperation of employees working toward a common goal and working with suppliers and then, working with customers.
Right, 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 right.
There's one I think one of the things that's come up in this conversation also came up in the book is if you want to expand the kind of moral field of business education, bring in other topics. And what I've seen at Yale in 10 or 12 years with the relationships between students who are involved in the business and the environmental school. And I know you have something similar at Michigan with
We do.
Herb. Um, there's an opportunity for maybe defining that more fully, that the opportunity to connect from other parts of education to inform uh, how you can behave or what you can accomplish in business that's not strictly the making of a product or a service, but how you actually benefit society and help replenish the natural world.
Yeah, the way I phrase it in the book is we spend a lot of time in business school talking about the how of business. You've got the core, you've got operations and accounting and finance. We spend very little time on the why. Why are you doing this? What if it's just more money,
Mhm.
focusing on the next quarter, you're gonna have companies like Boeing. I mean, Boeing was a leader in making quality products. And then they merged with McDonnell Douglas. They started focusing on quarterly returns. They started making the system more efficient.
Yeah.
And I hesitate to use the word destroyed, but they've seriously damaged that company. And that's what happens when you get this myopic focus that the only thing matters is the next quarterly returns.
It's interesting that you bring up the example of Boeing, because Boeing was founded by pioneer aviators and people who loved flying and the idea of how that could develop. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of businesses are founded that way. There aren't many businesses that are founded by people who are in it to, well, except in the tech world,
Yeah.
to,
Well,
to,
and
to get in and get out. Yeah.
a serious indictment of the business degree when Boeing went into free fall and they started looking for a new CEO. The CEO of Emirates, one of their major clients, said, "I don't want to see another MBA in that slot. I want to see an engineer who actually knows how to build airplanes." And um, and that gets down to what is the purpose of the firm? I mean, is it just to make money for the shareholder? Then you're going to have that kind of activity. But Peter Drucker used to say the purpose of the firm is to identify and serve a market. Its
Mhm.
profits are a measure of how well it does that. And that brings back care and quality of craft.
Mhm.
Um, you at Patagonia, you take pride in the products that you make. And, even Yvon Chouinard, there was a point where his company was becoming something that he didn't recognize. And he said, I don't like this. I'm going to sell it. And someone said, Yvonne, it's your company. You can do what you want. And he refocused. And there's a model there. I mean, I know Patagonia is a special case, private company that has a dedicated clientele, but it does model a way forward of thinking about what business can be. And for that, we need business schools to instill that ethos of what business leadership can be.
Yeah. I think the other point raised by what you're saying is that, especially if, I mean, it's one thing for business to focus on its financial health, rather than the product it makes. It probably in both our view would be a misstep. But the second problem is to focus on stock price, and quarterly returns. And I think what you see, if you're looking at the health of human communities and nature, if you look at the long-term interests of business, they often can align pretty well with
Yep.
what benefits society and what benefits nature. But if you're looking short-term, where you really need to distort basically your activities in order to increase that short-term profit, you're not helping the business long-term. As you point out in the book, shareholder capitalism hasn't worked for shareholders. It's worked for a
See,
wealthy cohort, but it hasn't worked in general for shareholders, and it's not working for society.
I mean, it's an incentive system. It's a reward system. And once you create that, people chase a reward. And if the share price is the only thing that matters, there are ways to manipulate the price with share buybacks and things like that. Paul Pullman has been a great proponent of trying to break that culture. And when he was at Unilever, he eliminated quarterly reports.
Yeah.
Even went so far as to say, he started making fun of hedge fund managers, saying I think they'd sell their mother if there was a buck in it. Who does that? And he even went so far as to say, if you don't like what we're doing with the sustainable living plan,
Mhm.
maybe we're not the right company for you, rather than just selling yourself. And um, and now what he's doing is trying to get that change. And I think this is an important voice.
Yeah. I think that I'd like to talk a little bit about, or ask you a little bit more about why you think shareholder capitalism has come to its crux, or its.
Well, it the history of capitalism in this country, at least. We had managerial capitalism before shareholder capitalism. Most of my students, not most, all my students don't know that.
Mm.
Um, they only know one form, this form. And I think that's important for them to know that something else can come ahead,
Mhm.
that we will continue to evolve. And right now, shareholder capitalism is causing problems in the environment, whether it's climate change, species extinction, freshwater availability, um, nitrogen and phosphorus in the
Mm.
environment, and causing problems in the social environment with income inequality that's reaching levels that we haven't seen since the Gilded Age, um, gender inequality, racial inequality. Um, And these are embedded within the system. These aren't externalities. These aren't unintended consequences. It is the product of the system as it's designed. And so now it's time for change. And I really do want to stress it's not throw it out. It's not say, move to socialism. I'm not saying that. Um, every set of institutions has to come from the institutions that came before. Um, in all due respect to Naomi Klein, who I really admire, we're not going to shred capitalism and come up with a new system. It's not possible. Um,
Mhm.
there was a wonderful essay by Stephen Jay Gould that we all had to read as doctoral students. And in the essay, he says the idea that Abner Doubleday invented baseball in 1896 in Cooperstown, New York, is preposterous. There was a game that was evolving, and he saw
Uh-huh.
and he wrote it down. And Adam Smith did not invent capitalism in 1776 when he wrote Wealth of Nations. He saw a system evolving. He added to it, he codified it, but he saw something happening. We are now in a period of flux where something else will emerge. We don't know what that's going to be, but we should have a say, we as business school professors and as the students engage in the conversation. What is the purpose of the firm? What is the role of government in the market? What is the role of business and policy making? These are questions we need to ask. How do we think about
Mhm.
consumption? Can you
Mhm.
have a sustainable society that's based on consumption? There's a real Gordian knot that I don't have
Yeah.
an answer for, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't ask the question. And so, what will be the system that will come? And this is one point where I can actually quote Tucker Carlson, who had a quote. He said, "Capitalism is a tool, like a staple gun or a toaster. If it's broken, fix it or get another one." And that's what I'm talking about here. And so we want to have students think of themselves as stewards of the market. We want them to be intelligent to try and guide the market to being what we need rather than just accepting it as it is and just taking theirs. That's the next generation of business leadership I'd like to see.
Mm. I can attest from the practitioner's point of view that Patagonia, when we ask the big questions, it immediately goes into how does this play out in the business operations.
Mhm.
So if you ask, okay, if we say we're in business to save our home planet, what do we need to do in ops? What do we need to do in finance? What do we need to do in the way we sell things to help make that truer than it is today? Then it 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 informs. It actually makes us better, I think, at the way we operate the company, to ask the bigger questions first rather than to exclude them from questions about making the company more efficient or.
Mm. And I think if you don't ask them first, C.S. Lewis used to say that you have to put first things first. If you put first things second, you'll chase the wrong thing.
Yeah,
And if you make profit first and the planet second, you're going to chase the wrong thing. And
right,
that doesn't mean profits don't matter. A company can't be sustainable if it goes out of business.
right,
But if you just make it all about money and then try and fit in the other important stuff around the edges, it will be a very diluted idea of what you're trying to do.
right. And to not to beat poor Boeing to death, but it isn't just what you do to the passengers. It's what you do to the product,
Yeah.
in the course of focusing on one element of the business, which is
And
sure.
it can also open your eyes to ways to make a more successful business. I mean, I
Right.
fully understand that this book coming out right now in this political context, some will call it woke. I don't know what that word means, but they'll call it woke to mock it. And I will, I would gladly engage that debate because, I mean, a lot of the energy right now over change is, jobs going overseas. And I think we justifiably, again, echoing Angus Deaton, that if you're going to move businesses, you have to think about people's lives, and it
Mm.
has to be part of the equation. And then if someone is uncomfortable with the mention of climate change, Well, guess what? Take a look at the home insurance market in this country right now.
Mhm.
It's in crisis mode. Um, Increasingly frequent and severe storms, and I'm not just talking about hurricanes, but what's called secondary perils, um, atmospheric rivers,
Mhm.
hailstorms, and insurance rates over a 5-year period have gone up 34%. Uh, the Fed Chair Powell said there are some places in this country that will be uninsurable. You want to damage the economy? Damage the real estate sector. It's
Yeah.
happening. Rates are going up, coverage is decreasing or getting eliminated because of a changing climate. There are other factors I know, rising insurance costs, building in harm's way, but it's the weather. And,
Yeah.
and so I actually think that you can call it woke. I would call it negligent not to address these issues.
Yeah. But the insurer of my house will not take on new customers in California, Allstate.
Yeah, yeah. State Farm's trying to figure out what to do. Uh, and then, the fires in LA. Who's going to pay for the properly scoped water system to deal with the next fire?
Yeah.
Because there will be a next fire. Who's going to pay for that? Someone has to. And and insurance is really scrambling right now to try and figure this out. That to me is an interesting thing because a lot of people will deny climate change is real. Um, but if you monetize it, they start to pay attention. And insurance is the sort of the canary in the coal mine, and they're putting a price on this. And you can look at data coming out of particularly the reinsurance company, Swiss Re, Munich Re, showing this increase in storms, storm payouts, storm severity, storm frequency. This isn't the EPA. This isn't the Environmental Defense Fund. This is an insurance company with no political dog in the fight.
Yeah.
You can argue the data. Good luck.
I think it comes back to this question of why, I mean, taking it back to our original topic, why business education uh, why it's not as relevant as it needs to be. And it really is two things. One is what should we be doing, but then the other is to look at a series of convergent crises, both human and environmental, that are forcing a change. That we know that the currents, a lot of the current practices and systems like insurance, um, uh, like construction, like the food systems, are in peril and need to change. So
Yeah.
we're being motivated in two ways. One is what should we be doing? What would be a good outcome in general? And secondly, what do we have to do on the basis of all of these things coming to a head in a very short period of time?
I
So
think back to the idea that we're in this moment of chaos. I mean, it's like a perfect storm. You have these pressures from outside, whether it's climate change, inequality, whether it's the political environment. Certainly, higher education is being attacked right now. Um, Changes from the inside. Students demanding more, AI fundamentally altering what we do. Everything's happening at once. To try and hunker down and just ride out the storm, I think that's crazy. I mean,
Mhm.
now is the time to lean in
Right.
to an effort on reform, responding to the cyclone of pressures around us, and imagine a new kind of business school. Now is the time.
Right. Well, I think this is a good time to open up the questions to the students and
Okay. And
have
I have
a
to tell you, Vincent, by the way, when I told my students that I'm being interviewed by Vincent Stanley, they're like, he's a rock star.
That's the way we feel about him here too at Yale. Great conversation. I mean, to that end, I'd like to open it with this question. If we're trying to generate a different, more human and ethical business mindset in our students, there are practices and models that we should stop teaching. What do you think we should stop teaching if we want to help them unleash this positive power of business to improve the world?
I'm glad that question came up. There's a paper by Sumanta Ghoshal came out in 2010 called Bad Management Theories Are Ruining Good Management Practice. And that was his gist, is that there are some things we need to stop teaching. And so let me just go down some of the ideas that I have. I mean, efficiency. As one of my colleagues says, we worship at the altar of efficiency. If it's efficient, it's good. If it makes more money, if it reduces costs, it's good. And I think we need to be a little more sophisticated about than that. There was Amartya Sen, a Nobel Prize winner in economics, who said, a society can be perfectly efficient in the Pareto optimal sense and still be perfectly disgusting. And so really rethinking our notions of efficiency, start to rethink our notions of growth. GDP measures the movement of money. Doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, as long as money moves, it's good. And that's not true. Some movement of money is not good. To make a goofy example, I could start every day eating Krispy Kreme donuts, have lunch at McDonald's, and finish up my day at Burger King. I could do that every day, and GDP goes up. And then I have a heart attack and go to the hospital, and GDP goes up. And then I die, and my family has a funeral for me, and GDP goes up yet again. Clearly, some of those are good and some of those are not. And so how do we rethink growth? It's not just the movement of money. There's issues around quality of life. Um, the Gini coefficient should be factored in here. There are all kinds of ways of thinking about growth. Should we have steady state growth? Should we have deep growth? We should be discussing these ideas rather than just there's only one kind of growth. Are people inherently selfish? I think that's an assumption embedded within our curriculum that steers our students to be, in some ways, antisocial. And in fact, there is research to show that students come out of a 2-year MBA more selfish and more concerned about what other people think of them, namely their salary. And so that needs to change. We need to have a sophisticated conversation of the role of government in the market. I teach a course, Business and Democracy, and I bring together students from the School of Public Policy and the School of Business. And I ask them halfway through, what do your peers think you're taking this course? And the business students said, some of their peers said, why would you take a course on government? What does that have to do with business? Which is astonishingly naive. But then the policy students also said, their peers said to them, you actually went in that building? You actually took a course there? They're the enemy, which is also astoundingly naive. And so how do we think about a more sophisticated notion of the interplay between business and government? I can keep on going. There's a lot. I mean, technology will not solve all our problems, yet that's embedded within our curriculum. I can keep on going, but it's a great question. You don't have to just teach new things. You have to stop teaching some old things.
So there's a few great ones in here I want to get to. Another one is, how can business schools reconcile the current overemphasis? I mean, you mentioned earlier on journal ranking driven research, which lacks real world or often lacks real world relevance. Incentives are linked with journal ratings and rankings, and that's what's promoted by the agencies also. So how do you not do that?
Well, I see 3 obstacles to change. And this is one of them, the reward systems. We are rewarded for publishing academic articles in academic journals that are theoretically driven, that are asking questions that business people really don't care about, publishing in journals they don't read, using a language they can't understand. Our language is opaque. Sometimes that research can be actually quite useful. And there are efforts to try and change the top journals to focus on more relevant questions. The Responsible Research and Business Management Network, RBM, is trying to change the journals. And I think a second piece of that has to be, good for you. You published an A-level publication, or B, I don't know. What are you going to do with it now? How are you going to bring it to the world? I'd love to see more faculty do that. And there's some movement in that area. Some schools are trying to change their reward systems to add a 4th criteria to research, teaching, and service, add practice, impacted practice. How are you doing that? I really encourage that movement. I want to see more of that as a way to change the incentives. And then, as I said before, senior faculty, do you really need another academic paper? Do you really, I mean, for students, I get it. To help students learn the craft, I get it. but to continually want more and more citations. Um, it's kind of like the person who just wants more and more money. Is there any end in sight? I don't see it. So I do see the reward systems as an obstacle. Just to finish out my thinking, the other two obstacles, one is rankings. The rankings push all business schools to look the same, to create a monoculture.
Mm.
That shouldn't be so. There should be different kinds of business schools. I know Yale, for example, tried to carve out a different niche for the School of Management that didn't quite work. Um, but you should have a diversity. You should be able to say, this is the kind of business education I want. I'm going to go to that school. Or I want this kind. I'm going to go to that school. They're both equally good. They're just different. I heard a speech recently by David Brooks at the Notre Dame Virtues of Vocations conference last year. He had a really interesting point. He said there are some schools where you meet a graduate, you know they went to that school. He was calling out Wesleyan, but could our business schools actually say that our students are imprinted, they're different in the way they think in a way that's special? And I'm not talking about go blue. I'm talking about a real different way of thinking about the role of commerce in society, their role in managers, as managers in running those businesses. I'd like to see more diversity in the rankings get in the way of that. The third piece is that this is an institutional challenge. One school can go off on its own way, try and invent itself as a different kind of business school. If they get hammered in the rankings, that dean's going to be out of a job. If you don't appreciate how much pressure is on a dean to keep the rankings up, the dean at Temple, the business school at Temple University, did some prison time for faking the data for the rankings. Um, so how do you get the entire ecosystem to move? All the schools, the donors, the students, admissions. You got to get the whole system to move. It's an institutional challenge. And so those are the three obstacles. And your questioner brought up the first one, rewards.
So this, I mean, related but different, but along those lines, like, so it's great. We have a question from the Yale program on stakeholder innovation and management. And the question is, so what academic discipline is best suited to develop coursework that teaches these new management practices like stakeholder capitalism, new purpose of the firm, and teaching students to be stewards of the market? Scholarship tends to be vertical, and these efforts are interdisciplinary and horizontal. So like, who's best to lead here?
Well, I really wouldn't. I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to make the answer so narrow because, um, first of all, we do have these disciplinary silos. Can we bust them down? I mean, I know Michael Crow at Arizona State is trying to bust down the school silos and create more integrated education. As the questioner said, our problems they don't land in a disciplinary silo. Problem isn't simply operational, isn't simply strategic. It's integrated, and how do we bring more integration back? A big part of the silos is for the faculty to be able to publish in their narrow disciplines and domains. And so how do we break that down and develop more diverse kind of thinking? And so I wouldn't necessarily say that this one discipline is the target. Uh, you just need creative people using the tools and the skills that they have, the training that they have to try and bring about a shift in the education using I'm using the word twice, but the tools at hand. And so I wouldn't say that one, and by the way, I would also add, I mean, I would love to see the boundaries between schools become far more pervious. Um, I'd like to see us graduate business students who can put together a finance deal to put up a wind array, be able to go to the School of Sociology and Psychology, understand why people are opposed to windmills, go up to engineering, understand what are the technological hurdles that need to be overcome for the next generation of windmills, walk over to the School of Public Policy and learn more about the tax structure and the subsidies and the ways that government is trying to stimulate or retard the development of wind. Develop a fully rounded student. And to be fully rounded, you're going to have to think beyond the business school.
Yeah, a lot there. Next one, let's see. I'll go with this one. What would be your advice to business schools whose resources for doing good are threatened by new policies? So, for example, subsidies will stop if they continue working on projects or programs related to climate change or diversity and equity and inclusion and others.
Hmm. I mean, this is a challenging time, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on how to handle a very fluid political environment. The president of Wesleyan did have an essay in Slate last month saying, "Don't demur, step up, hold up what you stand for." And some people came back and said, "Well, that's easy for you to say. You're a small liberal arts college in a blue state that doesn't rely on federal funding." I'm sitting in a very large state university that does, and it's a real concern. So I'm not going to pretend to have the answer on this one, other than to say um, these winds will die out. Um, there's tremendous chaos and flux right now. Let's see how it shapes out. One thing I would like to see, though, just again, I'm chairing this one, but as long as schools can be picked off one by one, if they don't work together, create a united front, um, I think that will be seriously damaging. And so, a more united front to say, we're all going to still focus on climate change because climate change is a serious business issue. I'd like to see that kind of a front. Maybe that's an adequate answer to a very, very difficult and an uncertain question.
For sure. No, thank you. So this one goes back to efficiency. On the topic of efficiency, it is the key selling point across industries within the corporate world, and especially for AI. Trying to shift this perspective in theory makes sense, but what about in practicality for the real business world? There has to be an alternative focus, which would be enticing for businesses to change.
I mean, again, and I'm not trying to just focus on semantics, but it comes down to how you define efficiency. So, for example, there was a study that came out in the National Bureau of Economic Research 2 years ago, and they looked at businesses in the United States and Denmark, and they separated them into two samples. One, businesses that were run by people who went to business school, and the other, businesses that weren't. Between the two samples, over a 5-year period, no discernible difference in revenues or profits, but the ones that were run by people who went to business school, labor wages went down 6%. So they maximized efficiency. They screwed people. Is that what we want? Is that what we want to create? Um, People that ran businesses that didn't go to business school, they shared the profits equitably with labor. And so I just think we need yes, you want to optimize. You want to weed out waste and corruption, a very topical issue right now. Certainly, but not at the expense of some over others. And so just having a broader perspective on when you say efficiency, what do you mean? And is it fair? Is it equitable? These are important considerations as well.
If I can, from the practitioner side, chip in here. I remember talking to a student at SOM a few years ago who had done a summer internship for an apparel company whose name I will not divulge. And they said that the basic plan for efficiency was every 6 months they went to their suppliers and made them cut their prices 3%. So, so this is, and if you pursue that kind of efficiency, you're really not in the area of innovation. You can make yourself efficient to the point of irrelevancy if you don't concentrate on the core needs of the customer.
And I had a student one time who came back from a summer internship at a major uh, consumer goods company who will remain nameless. And the summer project was how to redesign their detergent bottles so that people over poured and used more product so that they can increase profits. there's a model of efficiency that I find repugnant. Now, these are extreme examples, but there are more subtle ones as well that say as long as it makes more money, it's good.
Another question, what do you see as the role of unions, worker co-ops as a combating force against inequity and exploitation? Are these viable modes to move forward towards fair and equal worker treatment in a competitive market environment?
Well, I go back to John Kenneth Galbraith. I mean, in the era of managerial capitalism, post World War II up until about 1970, corporations were powerful, but there were countervailing forces, strong unions and strong government, and that kept things in balance and check. Um, Now unions are weak. That countervailing force is gone. Sure, there are problems with unions. Some have problems with corruption, but without any kind of um, collective voice to push back on the press for efficiency, as we've been just talking, the worker will lose. And so I think unions are important, and it's an unfortunate fact of our present market environment that they've been reduced in power.
I'm hoping I can squeeze two more in because they're both good. One is what advice do you have for PhD students aspiring to academic careers? Should we stick to interdisciplinary environmental schools or try and change systems from within at business schools or other?
This is a great question and a challenging one because the institution of academia changes slowly. And so you do have to play by the rules as they are right now. And it is an apprentice system. But I think about Deb Meyerson's idea of the tempered radical. Um, be tempered, learn the craft, play it well, be radical. Hold these ideas in your heart and in your head that are at variance with the rules as they are, and bring them out slowly as you advance in your career. Don't totally bury them because they will die. It's like a plant that needs sunlight, but try and maintain that dual identity and allow that to animate who you are and what you do. I think it will make you a stronger academic. I think that if you really care about the real world and aren't driven solely by A, theoretical questions, and B, by extrinsic measures. I think this is an important point here is that if you're only driven by extrinsic measures, you're just going to be led along. But if you have your own intrinsic idea of why did you get into this business in the first place, what kind of a professor do you want to be? I think you'll ask much better questions. Um, you'll have a much more vibrant career. And when it comes time and you get that chance to be a full professor, which I think is a wonderful gift that not enough of us really make full use of, you will have a clear sense of who you are and what you want to do with it. So I think it's a blend of idealism and pragmatism. The rules are as they are. Deal with the rules as they are, but also try and hold on to who you are. It will make you more resilient. It will make you stronger, make you a clearer sense of why you're here on earth. The idea of a vocation, I think, is really central here.
Okay, I think this will be the last one. It's also great. The question is, and again, maybe this is in the book, but she wanted to ask, or he wanted to ask, what does a roadmap for transforming business education look like? You've had great recommendations for students, but what would you recommend, kind of laid out for professors, business school leaders, or other stakeholders who want to be a part of and support this transformation?
Well, I don't think I can give you a roadmap that says we're here and we're going to end up there and these are the steps to get there. I think that I think we have an opportunity here to try and um, change our own approach and portfolio. I've often for academics, I've used the analogy of a jazz musician. You want to be a jazz musician. You're a student, you want to be a jazz musician. To do that, you have to learn your scales. So as a doctoral student, you have to learn the craft of writing turgid academic prose. You got to learn it. I tell my students that your cod liver oil, you have to swallow it. It tastes bad, but it's going to allow you to get a great job. It's going to make you healthy. After you've learned your scales, you're going to start to learn how to play someone else's music. After you've really gotten good, you're going to get to start to improvise and play your own music. That should be the goal. And if you buy too much into what the academic journals, particularly the A-level academic journals, say is this is all that matters for research, it's gonna be hard to be a jazz musician because you're gonna always be playing someone else's tune. And so really holding on to why did you get into this? What is the intrinsic motivation? And don't just live by the extrinsic rewards. Um, they 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 will not lead you towards being a great jazz musician.
Vincent, I'll let you wrap it up from here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Heather, and thank you so much, Andy. I think we've closed on a couple of wonderful notes, so to speak. And one is the need in business education, but also in business, to be a jazz musician and to be a tempered radical, because understanding what it takes to run a good business is absolutely essential, but being able to make the changes when those changes become possible and identifying that is even more important these days. So thanks very much.
Oh, and thank you, Vincent. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Really learned a lot from you. Thank you.